Hey everyone, this is James from TDB. Today I will be indeed drinking some tea on this episode, this Inbetweenisode, but I'm also going to be talking about a concept, and I'll talk about why this tea ties into that specific concept. So I'm going to be talking about a couple context clues, and context clues just in terms of figuring out if a tea is worth trying. A lot can be determined about kind of the quality of the tea and whatnot without even trying the tea, and we can learn a lot about it. And for me, at least, with TDB, we're exposed to a whole lot of different tea from different vendors, different people. And so, one option is you could try everything, but in my opinion, that starts to become unsustainable. There's a limited amount of tea that you want to consume, or that you're capable of consuming too. And there's a lot of teas worth trying, but there's also a lot of teas that, in my opinion, are not enough in kind of like the lane of interest for myself, that you want to be able to filter those out without trying them. So yeah, a lot of people will come to us. Another place where I see this kind of concept in action too is in Reddit, where somebody will post like a tea, usually a pu'er cake in the pu'er subreddit, or sometimes a pu'er in the tea Reddit. I'll be like, hey, what is this? Is this worth trying or not? And so without people have to determine and whatnot by looking at the cake and determining just kind of the characteristics and what it is and what it's not. So yeah, a couple different things there. So the first thing is, what info do you have about the tea? So the tea that I will be drinking is a tea cake that was gifted to my friend's parents a while ago. It must have been, because this tea says 2010. I'll be talking about what it is and if I would find it to be worth trying or not. But I thought it was a good kind of tip to just kind of talk about these different concepts and things like that. I think maybe the most important context clue is, who is the source? Where did this tea come from? I think this is maybe the most reliable way to find if the tea is worth trying or not. Does it come from a reliable vendor or through friends? Is that friend a tea friend? Like, is this person really, really deeply into tea and they know what they're talking about? Or is it someone that is maybe a casual tea drinker or not a tea drinker at all? In the case of my friend's parents, they're not tea drinkers at all. So that's one context clue that would probably work against trying this tea. The unknown friends that gave this tea to them, I don't know much or any background about them. So that'd be something that is just kind of unknown. So you are often working with incomplete information. But still, knowing the source is very important. If you know at one time that this was sold by Yunnan Sourcing, that would lend the tea at least an air of credibility. Or if it came from like someone that really, really knows their stuff. So if it came from like my friend Oolong Nell, who drinks tea all the time, just like me. So you would treat that a lot more seriously than if my friend Michael or someone like that came to me. Sorry, Michael. So yeah, if you can determine what site it came from too, or what vendor it came from, that is also another helpful context clue too, because you can visit that vendor site and you can see the different things that they're selling. Is it something where they're really specialized in one type of tea and this type of tea is within that category? Or are they mostly selling different flavored blends that are probably catering towards a different audience than, for instance, viewers of this show? So those are all kind of like very quick things that you can find out depending on what the tea actually is. Obviously, when it comes to kind of these nameless cakes that show up on the pu'er Reddit, a lot of them are hilariously just the most generic pu'er cake wrapper that you can come up with. So there's very little you can know about the thing other than it's Chinese tea, quote unquote. So another one is price. So if you can figure out what the tea is the tea appropriately priced? Is it too expensive? Is it too cheap for what it is? So I will say one thing in terms of too cheap. A lot of people will kind of get into this thing where things that are technically possible to be true but are extremely unlikely, these in my opinion are rarely worth trying. So for instance, is it possible that someone pressed a Lao Banjan cake in 2008 from like some secret family farm and stored it away, but couldn't sell it until much later, and for some reason had to sell it for $30 in 2024? Technically, it is possible. It's extremely unlikely, and in my opinion, these very tall tales are not really worth checking out unless you are double or triple verified from someone that's like a really good source and knows what they're talking about, that this is true. I think about it, and there are virtually zero ripe Lao Ban Jongs that cost $30 from 2015 that I'd be tempted to try. I think in general you want to be defaulting to be a little more skeptical because this is Pu'er. There's a lot of stuff that gets tossed at you, and a lot of it is kind of bullshit. Reddit is littered with teas, almost all of which I would not even want to try. So again, this information is useful for filtering out stuff. It's of course important not to overjudge a tea, but in a world where there's a bazillion teas, 1,000 of teas worth trying, there's another 1,000 that are not worth your time, in my opinion, too. And learning to filter those out so you can spend more time with the teas that are worth trying, I think is an important skill and one that is worth anyone that's really serious about tea learning, especially if you're kind of exploring different vendors and things like that. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about the tea that I'm trying. So I talked a little bit about it, how it's from my friend and her parents who were gifted it. The tea says 2010. One easy trick you can do for wrappers too, so this is not the generic Zhongcha wrapper, is you can point your camera at it and use Google Translate and it will translate an image. I don't read Chinese characters, but from this I was able to figure out that, hey, this says Yiwu, this says Gushu. These are fairly generic terms. Yiwu is a pretty broad region, but it is a sought-after region. So old tree, Gushu, and then this says ripe tea. So 2010 Yiwu ripe tea is what we're dealing with. So that automatically will set off a lot of different alarm bells about this tea. Why is someone making this material from Yiwu, fairly precious, fairly expensive material, into a ripe tea? And why was this happening all the way back in 2010? So there's a lot of question marks with this tea. In my opinion, if someone came to this tea in Reddit or somewhere else and asked me if this tea is worth trying, I'd say probably not even. That being said, I told my friend I'd try it, and I thought it'd be an interesting one to just kind of bring on to the show. So I will be drinking the tea now, and so we will see what it has to say. But based off of the context clues of this tea, it's not something that I would think is going to be terribly worth your time. But for educational purposes, I think it might be. Okay, so let's get into this. I have given this a rinse already. Yeah. And I'm already a little sketched out by the tea, just by the fact that it's an Yiwu ripe from 2010 from very unknown origins. So yeah, it brews out like a ripe. The leaves are very, very dark and black. Has a really weird smell to it, I'm going to say. Very perfumey. The other thing, of course, with Pu'er, especially for something that's supposedly older like this, is what was the storage like? In some ways, this kind of smells like my friend's parents' house. So, yeah, a lot of kind of old furniture, old Asian smells to it. Yeah, it doesn't really smell like you'd expect a Pu'er from like Scott or someone like that to smell. Anyways, cheers. Relatively thin, a little creamy. Yeah, just very thin overall. I suppose it's not awful. But it's just very, very thin. There's very little of substance within this tea. Let's do another steep just to see if it needs a little more going in. Using my standard parameters here, so about 5 grams, 70, 75 milliliters. Boiling water, of course. The color is definitely brewing a little on the light end for ripe, but perhaps that's reflective of the drier storage. It does leave a little bit of a drying taste on the mouth as well. Kind of a basic sweetness there. Definitely very woody, very ripe. Cheers. Yeah, it's thin and it's a little sour. It's not giving me as much sweetness too. I think there are basically two possibilities with this tea. I don't think it's very good in its current state. One is definitely that it could be pretty dried out. The house that it was stored at is also in the kind of greater Seattle area. and it's maybe a little more humid, but it's similar kind of cold and probably running the heater all the time, so probably a little dry in there. And I can taste a bit of that too. I don't love the way that the tea lingers in the mouth. Profile wise, it's not awful, but it's just thin, and it doesn't really offer you much worth trying. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in the ripe that I was drinking this morning, the Old Reliable, and I will compare that directly with this tea. So out comes the big blue pot, and we are going to just compare this. This is a nice way just to determine that the tea is indeed not very good, just by comparing it with something of very known quality rather. The Old Reliable, which is, as advertised, it's a very reliable but fairly ordinary ripe tea from white tea. So you can see this brew is a little darker than this one. Not necessarily that is a red flag on its own. Okay, so really basic woodiness from here. I don't think you'd get sick from drinking this 2010 tea, but I also don't think it's very good. Let's see. Let's take a quick smell. Stronger aroma from the Old Reliable. Yeah, a little spicy on that Yiwu. Interesting. Cheers. And I mean, honestly, guys, of the information that's there on the wrapper, the order of which I am the most skeptical of is Gushu. I seriously doubt it's a Gushu. Old Tree, I doubt it's an Yiwu. I would say I would doubt the Gushu claim first, then the Yiwu claim. But it is definitely a ripe. So of those three pieces of information, I would say the ripe part is probably accurate. Well, it is accurate, but the other two are not. Cheers. Yeah, so this is what ripe should taste like. And honestly, the 2010 Yiwu is not even close to the same league as the Old Reliable. So I think for that, it means that this tea will end up in the compost, which is probably what my context clues would have told me in the first place too. But wanted to just double check all those, cross all the T's, dot all the I's. And yeah, this Old Reliable tastes really great in comparison to that tea. Okay, so that wraps up this episode. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you learned something from this episode. If you thought it was interesting, if you have any comments, happy to hear those too. Again, we're doing very informal tastings here just because it's a little easier to do. So I apologize, not double blind or anything like that. So thank you all. I will see you all next time.